is, hey, Dr. Otto, is HCR 132, is that the, essentially it's not the rescheduling necessarily, is it?
No, it has nothing to do with rescheduling. The medical use of cannabis in Hawaii is already exempt from state Schedule 1. That's why patients do not face the criminal penalties associated with that. So there is no need to reschedule at the state level. And rescheduling at the federal level, I mean, that's something people have been working on for 40 years. It's a huge effort. And if you go at it from a medical point of view, it doesn't make a lot of sense because the DEA will just say, no, it doesn't have accepted medical use, whether that's right or wrong. It's been proven not to be a viable pathway. I think a much better way to proceed is to try to get a federal exemption that does not require any change to state or federal law. And it lines up with an existing exemption and an existing administrative pathway for getting such an exemption.
And yeah, sorry, I was listening, but I'm not quite understanding what that's going to do for us. Is it going to help more just on the research end of things?
So,
HCR 130.
Right. So if the Department of Health follows through with this request and files for the federal exemption, of course, we would have to see how the DEA responds. But if we were able, the goal is to get rid of this misconception that our program is violating federal law. States do not create programs that violate federal law. If they do, the federal government comes in and shuts it down. But we have this regulation, this rule, Schedule 1 rule that is creating the impression that our program is violating federal law. That's the problem. We need to remove that conflict in order to gain control of how cannabis is being used in Hawaii. Does that make a little more sense? It's a little counterintuitive almost, because we've all been taught for years that federal law always preempts state law and there's nothing we can do about it. And somehow it's been okay to operate in supposed violation of federal law for 21 years. I just don't see how that's possible. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it is possible, but it just doesn't work very well.
And just to follow up, if that exemption was achieved, would you expect to see decrease in some of the problems you mentioned, like the custody issues and people losing jobs because of positive screening tests and problems with subsidized housing and such? Would a lot of those problems basically go away if the exemption was achieved?
Yeah, I would expect that all of the problems we're currently facing would go away, to include banking. Right now, the existing dispensaries cannot access traditional banking services, so everything's in cash. That is a huge public safety issue. This is something that's been addressed by other state attorney generals, because having cash businesses not only puts the dispensaries at risk, but it puts the public at risk because of the criminal activities that surround that. Unfortunately, there is a bit of an uphill battle here in Hawaii, because our attorney general is not completely behind solutions that the state could act upon to end this conflict. And I believe this is because there may be a personal bias against legalizing the recreational use of marijuana somehow. And I've come across this with some of my other Republican state lawmakers in my district, that there's a fear that if somehow we protect the medical use of cannabis, that's going to immediately push us into recreational legalization. And so the attitude is just to avoid the issue altogether, which I'm afraid is only making the situation worse. I'm seeing what's happening with our medical program, and it is being destroyed from the inside out and the outside in, because there's a complete disregard for the rule of law. You know, you have patients and other members looking at the state saying, well, the state doesn't care about federal law, why should I? So this is another reason why we really need to get this under control.
I have a few more questions if
No,
you don't mind. So
Not
just to clarify, the applying for and getting the DEA exemption, I'm not seeing, from what you've explained, I'm not seeing any direct link from there to legalization, recreational legalization. From
Correct.
what I understand, this is just about fixing and improving the medical system.
This is about protecting the state's authority to decide how cannabis is used within the state, and the state has currently authorized medical use. I hope it stops there, but we need to protect that authority of the state if we're going to be able to get this under control. Yes, I completely agree. Getting exemption in no way pushes this into recreational legalization. And this is one of the points that I was able to bring up with one of our state lawmakers who introduced one of these measures, because he also had a similar concern that, well, if we stand up for medical use, then is that automatically going to make recreational legalization occur? And absolutely not. That's completely up to the state to decide.
Okay, great. And then last question, and I'll let someone else talk. Sorry about that, guys. Have any other states attempted this?
So I didn't have time to go into all the other states, but Iowa has been a big mover on this. Their legislation last year adopted a bill which was signed by their governor, which required their Department of Health to come up with ways to get guarantees from the federal government that would prevent federal funding from being withheld from schools and long-term care facilities where students and residents were using cannabis lawfully under state law. We've seen from Maine, who lost about $3 million because one of their programs was cut because they were allowing their students to use cannabis under state law. So this law was adopted by Iowa. The Department of Health did their due diligence and came up with this same option, the federal exemption option, using the same administrative process. They made that recommendation to the governor, and the governor's been sitting on it. There is currently a lawsuit in that state from a local activist, a writ of mandamus, asking the governor to disclose why they are not acting upon a law that the governor signed into law. That answer will be available hopefully within the next couple of days, unless they try to get an extension. So that's a state that is very close to filing this exemption. There's a bill in Minnesota that is moving through their legislature right now. And in fact, the language from that bill is what Senator Keoho Kalole used in the Senate Health Committee to amend HCR 132. So the language in there is very similar to the language in Minnesota's bill. And I know that a lot of times the legislature feels more comfortable if other states are also doing similar actions. And in this case, I think it's really a great opportunity, because if Iowa moves forward, which I expect they will, then our Department of Health could very easily join that application. It wouldn't have to do all of this drafting and research on its own. And I would think that the DEA would want exemption applications to all come together. There shouldn't be separate considerations for every state, especially when 3 states are working on it. So there's actually a great opportunity for the Department of Health to satisfy the request within HCR 132 without having to expend a lot of resources on that.
Thank you.
How is our like HACDAS? What's their opinion on this? Do you know?
Well, you know, I actually gave a presentation at probably about 2 years ago now at what was called the Marijuana Summit, held by the U.S. The local U.S. Attorney's Office.
Right.
And you know, I have to say that I think the attitude still is heavily leaning towards abuse, drug abuse, and addiction. But when it comes to marijuana, I think that that's a rather outdated approach, especially when it comes to medical use. There's such a big difference between medical use and supposed recreational use, although I would argue that a lot of people who say they're using it recreationally are really self-medicating. But so I have put this idea out there. I send updates every once in a while to the U.S. District Attorney And frankly, I don't get much back. So I believe they are aware of this. And I've even approached our local DEA agent about this. I think their approach is that they only really act when there's a need to, like if there was a court case or something like that. So they don't seem inclined towards making policy statements. So that's kind of where it stands.
Yeah. If you look at our kind of how we, I don't know if it's just Hawaii or the U.S. deals with medical marijuana. My understanding is in states that have medical marijuana laws passed first and then do recreational, much of the medical marijuana, whatever industry, either kind of completely, gets really small or transitions to recreational for the most part. And my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is like more so like in Europe, it is handled like a pharmaceutical product, where it's more controlled. Like here's your qualifying condition. It's a real qualifying condition, and we're actually going to dispense this like it's a medication, not like, okay, I understand you got a backache, 50-year-old white guy, and here this might help. Because my understanding also is that a lot of the qualifying conditions that really are effectively treated with THC or medical marijuana, they're not necessarily at the top of the list of what it's dispensed for.
So yes, Europe, especially the Netherlands, offers a great example of how this could be done. Having FDA quality botanical drug products that are available in pharmacies by a prescription, which places the responsibility squarely on the prescribing physician or healthcare provider. The problem in Hawaii is we have this arbitrary list of conditions that other states have adopted, partially based on the federal program, which recognizes glaucoma, but then all these other conditions which you can petition to add. I petitioned to have ALS added, which was adopted by our Department of Health. But I think ideally, the physician would, or the healthcare provider would decide what is appropriate medical use and not have some random list. This is being done in other states like California and Maine, where the physician and healthcare provider decides what is appropriate use for the patient. That, like I said, puts the responsibility on the physician or the healthcare provider. It does, of course, open the system to other potential abuses, but that's where we need our state medical board on board. We need guidelines from the medical board. How are these relationships supposed to be conducted? How are the evaluations supposed to be conducted? These are things that other state medical boards have looked at, and I've approached our medical board several times on this issue, and they felt that it was too much work to adopt formal guidelines. They will issue like an informal opinion, which doesn't do much. We need all of our state agencies and related boards involved in this to make it legitimate medical use. Hawaii could easily create FDA quality products for medical use that even local insurance companies could potentially cover, because if these products do not leave the state, they're not subject to FDA regulation. So we could save millions of dollars making FDA quality products that are only for use within the state. And we can very exquisitely control our state borders, unlike other states. We just say, you cannot take cannabis outside of the state, period. If we catch you, you're breaking the law. You're breaking federal and state law. So this really needs to be looked at in broader terms, which we cannot do right now because of this misconception that the program's violating federal law. We have a vertically integrated system. You may have heard when I was on the task force, we were talking about a horizontally integrated system, meaning you could have local production with local businesses producing material that could go through a central distribution system and tested and made sure it was safe, and production facilities. But reportedly, there was some pushback from law enforcement And a vertical integrated system was what was ultimately adopted, which is very wasteful. The dispensaries are realizing that it doesn't make any sense for 8 licensees to all do the exact same thing. It increases costs, and which in the end gets passed on to our patients, and then they end up going to the black market because it's too expensive. So these are all considerations that need to be addressed to really have a legitimate medical program.
Dr. Otto, I thank you for the presentation. There's a lot to digest. I think that
Yeah, I know, sorry.
it's really, really good. I think a couple of years ago, we had somebody else come and talk to us a little bit about, and not everybody was here at that time, but talk to us a little bit about the medical marijuana program.
Mhm.
I don't recall much, but it sounded like it was still developing. And when I hear you talk about what people's reservations about the program, it sounds like there's just a lack of understanding or lack of confidence in the program and what it could lead to, what this means for the future, what comes next. Some of the things that I hear, it's like, well, if you have medical marijuana, but you can't even give me a dosage, like how much is okay, and how much for this treatment, for this condition, how much for that condition. There's THC, there's all this other stuff. These, is that the same thing as marijuana? What is, there's oils, is that the same thing if I just get, smoke it? Like, there's just so many questions about it.
Mhm.
Are there any ways that you're getting information out to the public, or how is the medical marijuana program being, is there any public education around it?
One sec.
Well, so that's a very good point. The Department of Health is mandated by its medical cannabis registry special fund to direct some of the funds that it gets into education. And we've seen really very little education at all from the Department of Health. I believe this is partly due to kind of an internal conflict over regulating a program that a lot of its administrators feel violates federal law. And maybe they feel that puts them at certain risk. But we need education to all of the stakeholders, to physicians. We need CME level conferences to all of our doctors. We need a local certification for doctors and healthcare providers who want to certify patients. And the law requires that there be a doctor-patient relationship, which is a little challenging because we're not treating anything. As I said, I don't recommend that patients use cannabis. That's their decision. But I'm required to have a doctor-patient relationship, which means I have to supervise their medical use. And the way I do that is I provide patients with tailored information, educational information that allows them to make decisions on what might be appropriate for their medical use. And then I am available for follow-up to help guide patients along this process. Cannabis is different than any other medical substance that I've seen in that it seems like everybody reacts a little bit differently. I think partly due to polymorphism in our cannabinoid receptors and in the enzymes in our liver that metabolize these cannabinoids. Some people are extremely sensitive to THC. Some people don't seem to be sensitive at all. So that's all something that needs to be worked out between the patient and the certifying provider. Unfortunately, most of the people doing these certifications have no background in medical use of cannabis. And so a lot of times it's just submitting the registration and then moving on to the next patient. And then I get calls from patients saying, well, I got registered, now what? what do I do? And a lot of times the patients are told, well, go to the dispensary and talk to the bud tender. And the Department of Health actually supports dispensary staff talking to patients about their products. And I think they need to restrict that. I think there need to be very clear guidelines that bud tenders cannot give information about product selection or dosages. I have 80-year-old patients walking out of a dispensary with a syringe of Rick Simpson oil being told, oh yeah, squirt about the size of a grain of rice onto your toast and eat it. And then they call me because they're hallucinating and they're falling down. So we need to have feedback from doctor to patient to dispensary so that there's a feedback loop so that the certifying physician knows what the patients are using and can offer suggestions on how to adjust that dose, what products might be more helpful for their particular condition. I approached the dispensaries when they first became licensed to try and create this type of relationship, and they were not interested. They feel that they are the experts. They want to maintain control of the discussion that goes on with the customers because they're salespeople. And the risk is that patients are being led to disclose confidential medical information with these bud tenders who are not medical professionals. They're not educated in HIPAA compliance, and yet they will try and extract this confidential information to provide menus to patients on product selection and even dosages. I've seen products with dosages written on the boxes. I just can't believe what's going on. And we need the Department of Health to step up. So I would like to know what is happening to the $38.50 registration fee that is charged for each patient every year. We now have 30,000 patients. That's over $1.1 million. Is that money sitting in the special fund? Is it gaining interest? Is it being used for other purposes? We really need to look into that. And I don't know if HACDACS has any authority to do that, but I think that's a great starting point. Why are we being told that there's only 3 staff within the Office of Medical Cannabis Control and Regulation? Why is it sitting with a branch that really does not have the capabilities to go out there and do dispensary inspections and patient growth site inspections? So these are some more of the issues that need to be addressed.
That's great. That's and is with HCR 132, is that like, are the barriers that exist to addressing these things, would that be overcome if this were to be passed?
Well, so I've been working at this for 10 years now. And I'm not a lawyer, I'm a medical doctor, but I've had to do my own research because we don't even get really much education. We don't learn about the endocannabinoid system in medical school, but we don't learn much about controlled substance regulation. So I had to go back and learn about that myself. So this is something that needs to be addressed. How do we make these changes? And that's why I appreciate the opportunity to come before you today.
Yeah, I mean, all good points, Dr. Otto, and that's one of the reasons I wanted you here, because I know you know so much, and I think so many people know so little about it. I've studied this kind of more on the adolescent substance abuse side and kind of the legalization side, but still, what you're talking about with the bud tenders, it'd be like having Purdue Pharma opening their own store and people coming in and saying, what type of opioid do I need? And you have a high school graduate say, well, this one works for me and you should try this one.
Well, you're correct. A lot of the information they're getting is based on personal experience. This worked for me. And then maybe they feel like they're getting around the issue because they're not really telling the patient they're doing it. They say, well, other people use it for this, but still, it's a very fine line that needs to be addressed. As I mentioned, I've been researching this for 10 years, and I've traced it all back to this issue. All of the problems we're seeing, I believe, come back to the fact that there is this belief that our program is violating federal law. We need to remove that misconception, and the way to do that is, one way to do that is to get an exemption, which would very clearly recognize yes, indeed, this is a constitutional authority. You are not violating federal law as long as this is something that remains within the state. It's up to you. Now, I know that our new federal administration is talking about different changes, and they have said, maybe we'll just leave it up to the states. That would be great. I would love to see it just stop there. Let the states decide what to do, period. But there's also, of course, going to be talk about a federal cannabis tax, national cannabis tax, which I don't think is the right thing to do. And then there's going to be some talk about federal rescheduling, which does not affect our medical cannabis program. If you put it in Schedule 2, okay, then pharmaceutical companies can start doing research. So if you put it in Schedule 3, then banks could become involved. But the material that's produced in Hawaii is never going to be FDA approved. There's no pathway for that. This is material that's being produced exclusively within the state for use within the state. So medical cannabis produced in Hawaii is never going to be FDA approved. It just does not fit under any of the criteria. So that's another reason why an exemption makes sense. It already does not meet any of the federal schedules 1 through 5. So what we're asking for is recognition of an exemption that already exists. That's all we want. The DEA doesn't have the authority to decide whether it's constitutional for states to decide what happens to controlled substances. They can issue rules, and one rule they could issue would be such an exemption.
Dr. Otto, we have, John has posted a question.
Oh, okay.
What are your thoughts on the DOH position on HCR 132? Granted, this is HD1, not the final SD1 version.
And granted, yeah, that this may be a repeat of some of the recommendations you've already cited earlier, but just to kind of crystallize what your thoughts are on it.
Well, so it became an HD1 in the House and made the very minor changes. Then it crossed over. It became an SD1 when the Senate Health Committee made some significant changes to the language taken from the Minnesota bill. It crossed back over to the House, and the House Health and Judiciary chairs recommended acceptance of the SD1. It went to a final House floor vote on April 23rd, at which point it was adopted in its final form. So HCR, HD1, SD1 has been adopted by both chambers of the legislature, and now it will be transmitted to the parties listed in the last paragraph of the resolution, which are Department of Health, Governor, Attorney General, and our congressional delegates. And so I have requested a copy of that certified resolution. And basically the chief of the House Clerk's office will sign it and date it, I believe. And then that becomes the certified copy. Unfortunately, they put it in regular mail. I would like to see it sent certified mail so that we could prove that it has been delivered. So that's another reason why I would like to get a copy of the certified version.
Yeah, it's just that they say the department's understanding is that 21 CFR 1308.35 precludes petitioning the DEA to reschedule or exempt any processed plant material containing any amount of THC used or intended for use for human consumption. So they're concluding that because chapter 329 already permits human consumption of THC, it's therefore unlikely. There's this reluctance to even submit a request because they're saying it's unlikely the DA would entertain the request as it would violate 21 CFR 1308.35. So I'm just kind of curious as to your take on that, on their understanding, department's understanding of that federal 21 CFR.
Sure. And this is a issue that they raised last session as well, because there was a federal exemption bill that made it to the Senate Health Committee and was deferred. And if you have a chance to look at my testimony on HR 132, as it moved to different committees this session, that exemption that they're pointing out is really irrelevant to this issue. It is an exemption that was granted for material that falls outside the federal definition of marijuana, namely the seeds, the sterilized seeds, and the stalks that are being used to make animal feed for animals, for animal consumption. So this basically says, if you're taking stalks and sterilized seeds from cannabis, from marijuana, that falls outside the federal definition of marijuana, so it's not technically marijuana, and you use that to make a product intended for animals, and if it has maybe some trace amounts of THC in it, don't worry, we're not going to arrest you. It's okay. That has nothing to do with applying for a separate exemption based on a constitutional authority reserved to the state. And I pointed this out in my testimony and to the chairs. And on the last committee hearing of this bill, the Department of Health did not even submit written testimony. So hopefully I have put this issue to rest. But this is kind of typical of what I am seeing, that there are these issues being raised rather than looking at solutions. How do we fix this? What can we do? And that's where I would like to see this move. And I hope that the resolution will provide that motivation. But of course, the Department of Health must speak to the governor, and the governor's chief legal counsel and the chief law enforcement officer of Hawaii is the Attorney General. So there is going to be a bias against coming up with solutions. And obviously the legislature looked at this very carefully, and they said, well, this looks like a viable option. We had several bills that were introduced this session that would have required the Department of Health. It was a shall, not a may provision. And there was some pushback, I understand, that the Department of Health didn't want to be told what to do. And I can appreciate that. There was also some concern that Governor Ige would just veto the bill. So why even put in the effort to get it to his desk? And so this was seen as a very reasonable way for the legislature to express its will. And it has done that. They want this fixed because they understand the issues. I have talked to many of our state lawmakers about this. They have, the Senate and House has their own legal counsel as well. They have independent counsel. They've all reviewed this and they decided to agree upon it. So that's where we're at. So now the ball is really squarely in the governor's court because he controls Department of Health. And the request very soon will be made formally through a certified version.
Yeah, and thank you. And I just read the article in the Star Advertiser the other day saying because of the budget and this session, just try to get past a budget, they are kind of the ledge is looking to do more aggressive policy pushes next session, which may include this recreational use of marijuana. So I guess you take it as they're giving the DOH a chance and see what their position is and what they'll do, and if not, they might take a bit more aggressive stance next year.
Exactly. This is a great opportunity for the Department of Health to step up and try and do something to protect our patients, which I would say is part of their mission, protect the health of our residents. And there are also 4 federal exemption bills that were introduced this session that were in a biennium. All those bills are still live. So if Department of Health is not going to act, then next session, there will be opportunity to take further steps. I hope it doesn't get to that because, as you probably know, getting bills and resolutions through the legislature is a huge undertaking. And I would like to see them take the initiative on this.
Have you talked to anyone directly in the AG's office on this?
So I have sent various emails and letters to the AG. Unfortunately, the Attorney General has attorney-client privilege with all of our state officials, which means that they cannot talk to me directly because perhaps some lawsuit would come up or something, and they would have to represent our state lawmakers. So I am not entitled to a discussion with the Office of the Attorney General. I would love to have some type of discussion where the Attorney General was involved in this. We really need their support of our state's authority to decide how cannabis is used within the state.
All right. No, this is a very good discussion on the pros and cons of cannabis, non-medical use. Just to note to everyone, this it is being recorded, and I will make the recording available for those
Great.
that
Well,
couldn't be here.
thank you so much, Dr. Otto. We really appreciate it. Just in awe of your activism and dedication to this issue, and the knowledge and legal information you've learned is very impressive. So really appreciate you sharing that knowledge with us. And I think it's given all of us a lot to think about and digest. And so interesting how something that maybe wasn't thought about very clearly early on in the process has led to this sort of current morass of a situation. And I think that's pretty fascinating. So we really appreciate it. And if there's anything we can do for you, please reach out. And we will sort of put together our thoughts on all of this, and we write an annual report sort of starting in the summer. And we may reach out to you with some questions to clarify if anything comes up as we're writing our recommendations and such, if that's okay.
Yes, please feel free to contact me anytime. I'm happy to answer further questions on the subject, and glad to hear that your annual report might be a chance to address this.
Yeah, I think we do this every year and never quite sure how much impact it has, but we certainly make our thoughts known based on the information we learn throughout the year. So it will certainly be included. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Yeah, I think every little bit helps. I'm reaching out to all stakeholders right now and say, if you believe in this, please let Department of Health know.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate you considering this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha, everybody.
Aloha.
Hi,